Welcome to Developing Sustainable Career Success. In this podcast, I'll be talking about the kinds of challenges the current business environment presents to those who are highly motivated to succeed in their careers and how they need to respond to this in order to remain on their career path over the long term. What to practice, day in, day out, that ensures the retention of perspective, balance and resourcefulness while at the same time enjoying career success. Let's first take a look at the kinds of challenges we currently face. Work-related stress was a growing problem even before the global financial crisis and the recession. For instance, occupational stress was the second most common health symptom for European workers, and prior to the accession of the Eastern European states, EU work-related stress affected 40 million workers at a cost of 20 billion euros a year. According to the American Institute of Stress in New York, occupational stress costs the US around $300 billion in absenteeism, accidents, employee turnover, reduced productivity, healthcare, and workers' compensation. Indeed, the American Academy of Family Physicians reports that 50 to 80% of serious illnesses, such as heart disease, strokes, cancer, diabetes, and depression, have stress-related origins. There is no doubt that the fallout from the global financial crisis and the subsequent recession has stretched many businesses to the extreme. Inevitably, this has led to restructuring and people being laid off, and an additional strain being placed on those employees who remain. All of this created what some are calling a stress epidemic. There's a surge in work-related stress and other mental health problems as people wrestle with worries over debt and job security, along with the growing intensity of work. An American Psychological Association survey conducted in September 2008, for example, showed 80% of US workers experiencing significant stress because of the economy, up from 66% at the beginning of the year. Another way in which this manifests itself is the growing culture of presenteeism, of people turning up for work despite illness, a phenomenon caused by people wanting to show commitment because of fear of losing their jobs. For example, there was a 94% increase in people working unpaid overtime in the UK in 2008 compared to the previous year, at a total value of £27 billion. So given this background, how do periods of prolonged stress affect us? Interestingly, most of the research on the human stress response is concerned with acute stress. How do we respond to a distinct, time-bound stress episode? There is little about chronic, long-term stress. What our research has shown is that work situations, however long-term dysfunctional, are not the primary cause of distress. It is the way in which we choose to handle these situations that primarily determines whether we become distressed. Our response to prolonged periods of intense chronic stress can best be viewed as existing on a spectrum. The initial experience is one of shock and numbness. Dependent on how we deal with this pressure, this can move on to increasingly less or more personally sustainable responses. At the less personally sustainable end, we move first into a state that we have termed joyless depletion. This is a condition in which we adopt highly addictive work styles, are in a permanent state of sleep debt, and prone, among other things, to reckless decision-making. We can either get stuck here or progress towards job burnout. Burnout is characterized by overwhelming exhaustion, distress, disillusion, dysfunctional attitudes to others, addictive behavior, and a reduction in performance and productivity. Most of those who burn out also derail. That is, they are either sidelined in their careers or they lose them completely. Burnout can lead to depression, a condition in which we experience hopelessness and despair, and which can result in self-harm and ultimately suicide. Moving towards the more personally sustainable end of the spectrum means we have chosen, albeit temporarily, to accept the situation as we find it and to find pragmatic and creative ways of working with it for the time being. This does not mean we have given up on changing the situation for the better. It means we are living within the constraints in which we currently find ourselves, whilst retaining a sense of hope and vision for a better tomorrow. If you're highly motivated to succeed in your career and have high expectations about your own accomplishments, you are likely to encounter more than your fair share of chronic stress. In fact, it is likely to be an endemic and all-pervading part of your working existence. Leadership brings with it the inevitable stress of trying to achieve things through others. Having high aspirations inevitably involves feeling anxious and frustrated about outcomes which are usually outside our control. Given that chronic stress is an inevitable part of our occupational landscape, it follows that how we deal with it will determine, in large part, our long-term career success. The other key variable, of course, is the organisation's role in creating stressful situations. Let's look at the latter first. Our research into leadership sustainability amplifies the significance of organisational culture, work conditions and controls in creating environments that foster stress. For instance, highly demanding, time-pressured workspaces, beset by highly competitive, distrustful, sometimes toxic relationships, are likely to lead to high levels of stress. Equally, cultural norms that favour an intense focus on the achievement of short-term goals, in which leaders have an exaggerated sense of their own importance, are likely to generate significant levels of stress and burnout. Inadequate or lax risk management systems and environments in which consulting others before making significant high-risk decisions is considered a sign of weakness also significantly increase levels of stress. Now let's look at the three core processes that shape the way we handle chronic stress and thus determine how successful we are in our careers. Our sense of personal purpose informs who we are and why we are here in the world. It is a profound sense of direction rooted in what we value, deeper and more enduring than the mere achievement of work goals. It goes beyond immediate self-interest, relating to the story each of us has about ourselves that defines who we are. Our research shows that leaders and professionals who conflate their personal purpose with the commercial aims of the organisation are often prone to derailment and ultimately burnout. Having a purpose of your own, separate from the organisation's, is central to sustaining a successful career. The second core process concerns our ability to step back, look critically at ourselves, and creatively adapt to changes in our environment, which we call reflection on action. The third is about the interest we take in our own physical well-being and the consequences this has for our sense of vitality and energy. We each have the capability to control and develop these core processes. The same cannot be said about our ability to change the part that the organisation plays in things, although we may seek to influence this. So the remainder of this session will focus on how we go about developing the core processes and relate them to the organisation's priorities. We've broken this down into 5 key steps. First, make space for a more sustainable version of yourself. Second, pay close attention to your own physical well-being and vitality. Third, deepen and thicken your sense of personal purpose. Fourth, identify the organisation's hot buttons and key cultural norms. And finally, explore the relationship between your sense of purpose and mission, what's important for you, and what's important for the organisation. In our work with leaders and professionals, we found it important to help them create space for new habits and patterns before moving on to develop the core processes. By creating space, we mean preparing ourselves psychologically to take in new ways of being and behaving. Humour, particularly the kind of humour which involves laughing at our own pretentious absurdity or the cosmic joke that is life, has the power to alter consciousness and allow in the new. As do each of these. Exercise releases tension in the body and helps to create a state of relaxation. Activities such as meditation or contemplative prayer help us to quieten our ever-chattering minds, become more centred, and reflect on our lives. Music and the arts can inspire us and help us envisage a better, more fulfilling future. The next step is to really pay close attention to your physical well-being and vitality. Apart from exercise, which I've already touched upon, the key things here are nutrition and sleep. Increasingly, research is pointing to the importance of eating what our colleague, Dr. John Briffa, calls a primal diet, one which is based on the foods that we've been eating the longest in terms of our evolution. Such a diet is essentially Mediterranean in nature and is composed of fruit, vegetables, root vegetables, meat, fish, eggs and nuts, but devoid of grain and dairy products, as well as nutritional newcomers such as refined sugar and refined vegetable oils. Drinking plenty of water during the day is also an essential part of staying alert and vital, while excessive caffeine and alcohol consumption needs to be avoided. Getting enough sound sleep is important for concentration, memory, and cognitive functioning. It also helps us maintain our immune system and our ability to repair and restore ourselves. Sleep research indicates optimum functioning requires we sleep for 7 to 8 hours a night. However, since the need for sleep is quite individual, it's important for each of us to judge whether or not we are in any degree of sleep debt. And one final thing on physical activity. Exercise, even lower intensity exercise, such as brisk walking or cycling for 20 minutes twice a week, is associated with improved general health and vitality. So how do you develop a personal sense of purpose? We've found there's no more sure way than asking oneself the right questions. These include, why am I here? For what do I stand? And what do I stand against? It's important to remember that any old purpose simply will not do. It needs to connect with what you hold dear, what holds value and meaning for you. It also needs to go beyond your self-interests and immediate concerns. It is, for instance, entirely laudable to be committed to your family, but as a leader or professional in an organisation, it's simply not sufficient. If you're getting stuck here, try thinking about the kind of organisation you want to create for employees, or the effect you want your organisation to have on the environment, or the society you want to create for future generations. The other way to get to your purpose is to think back over your life and look for the times when your purpose has shone through. These are more likely to be times when you've faced adversity and challenge, or when you had to make big changes in your life in order to keep going. Now it's time to think about what the organisation holds dear, in order that you can work out how you and it relate to one another. The 6 key areas on this slide emerged out of our research into how leaders sustain their careers over the long term. Ask yourself, when your organisation talks about engagement, what does it really mean? Does it mean to find a way to connect the organisation's purpose with your individual sense of purpose? Or does it mean for its people to believe that their outlook and interests are identical to its own? Where's the emphasis placed? On the achievement of short-term goals, in which only the immediate consequence of decisions on the business are taken into account, or on a more measured approach? Is finding and developing one's voice accepted as a part of making a career and a valid contribution to the good governance of the organisation, or conformity with norms and the status quo? What's the organisation's attitude to risk? Is emphasis placed on consulting key stakeholders before significantly risky decisions are taken? Or is unilateral decision-making, or decision-making by a small clique, the norm? Are leaders expected to recognise their limitations and held accountable for the consequences of their actions, or are they encouraged to think of themselves as not needing to comply with the rules that govern ordinary mortals? When difficulties are encountered, does the culture of the organisation encourage people to see possibilities and envision a better future? Or is it about forensic analysis of what went wrong and who's to blame? Having looked at the culture and values of the organisation, it's now a question of the degree to which this correlates with your sense of purpose and what's important to you. The key thing to remember here is that you're not looking for anything close to 100% correlation. The question is rather, is there enough of a connection here to make a long-term career sustainable, both for me and for the organisation? There are likely to be aspects of the organisation's purpose and culture to which you feel completely committed. This may or may not coincide with your personal purpose. What's important is that it allows your purpose to flourish and doesn't run against it. Equally, there are likely to be some aspects of the organisation's purpose and culture that you simply accept, to which you don't feel committed, but equally about which you don't feel strongly enough to change, and some that you do not like and wish actively to seek to change. Doing this helps to make the often subconscious psychological contract we have with our organisations explicit. It keeps us honest to what holds meaning for us, and ensures we retain a sense of personal integrity in our careers, as well as integrity in our dealings with the organisation. Most of all, it gives us greater and more informed choice in how we sustain a successful career over the long term in a way that benefits us and the organisation.